The first thing Nyla Williams noticed was the silence. Not the usual airport kind where announcements crackle and rolling suitcases collide in chaos, but a deliberate, controlled silence that seemed to orbit one man sitting 3 seats away from her gate. He wasn't looking at his phone like everyone else. He was looking at her. Not in a casual way. Not in a curious way either. It was the kind of attention that felt pre-assigned. Like she had already been accounted for in a plan she had never agreed to. When the boarding announcement finally came, Nyla stood with her economy ticket clenched between her fingers only to hear her name called again over the intercom. Passenger Nyla Williams. Please proceed to gate concierge. Confused, she walked forward. That was when she saw him up close for the first time. Tall, calm, immaculately dressed in a black coat that didn't belong to airport fashion. No luggage in sight. No urgency in his posture, just patience, too much of it. The woman at the desk didn't look at Nyla when she spoke. Your seat has been upgraded. First class. Courtesy of a private sponsor. Nyla frowned. I didn't apply for an upgrade. The woman finally looked up. It's already been processed. And then, just as Nyla turned slightly, her eyes met his again. The man from the waiting area. He gave a small nod. Not a greeting. More like confirmation. As if the upgrade wasn't a gift. It was placement. Before we continue, welcome to Annie's Empire of Love, where every story begins with a secret and ends with a choice that changes everything. If you enjoy emotional romance with hidden identities, dangerous love, and unexpected twists that stay with you long after the story ends, subscribe and turn on notifications, because every new story is crafted to pull you deeper into love, truth, and consequence. Now, let's return to Nyla's journey, because that upgrade wasn't the beginning of her luck. It was the beginning of her entanglement. Nyla Williams had not planned to be in Doha. 2 weeks earlier, she had been working overtime at a logistics firm in Atlanta, balancing spreadsheets and delayed shipments, while pretending she wasn't exhausted from a life that rarely gave her room to breathe. The World Cup ticket she held in her email inbox had been a joke at first. A promotional draw she entered during a late-night scroll session, half amused, half desperate for distraction. She didn't even remember submitting her real details correctly. Yet there it was. Selected winner, VIP final match experience Doha, Qatar. She almost deleted it. Almost, but something about the timing felt too strange to ignore. Her mother had always said luck doesn't knock, it interrupts. So Nyla packed a small suitcase, told herself it was a break she didn't deserve, but would take anyway, and boarded a flight she could barely afford to upgrade. That was before the airport encounter. Before him. Now, sitting inside the first-class cabin, Nyla felt like she had stepped into a different reality. Soft lighting, quiet attendants, seats that reclined like private pods instead of airline chairs, and across the aisle him again, Kang Do-yul. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew his presence had followed her from the gate. He wasn't doing anything obvious. No staring now. No movement that suggested ownership of the situation. Instead, he read a thin black document folder, gloved fingers turning pages with slow precision. But every so often, his eyes lifted. Not long enough to be caught easily, but long enough for her to feel it every time. Nyla shifted in her seat, uncomfortable in a way she couldn't explain. Is this seat taken? She finally asked when a flight attendant passed. The attendant smiled too quickly. All seats in this section are assigned, ma'am. That's not what I meant, Nyla murmured, more to herself. The flight took off smoothly. Too smoothly. And somewhere over the ocean, she realized something unsettling. She had not chosen this upgrade. It had chosen her. A few hours into the flight, a meal was served carefully plated, nothing like the usual airline trays she expected. Nyla stared at the food, unsure whether she was meant to eat it or admire it. A voice interrupted her hesitation. You don't like seafood? Low, calm, measured, she turned. It was him. Close enough now that she could see the subtle detail she had missed before, the faint scar along his knuckle, the restrained stillness in his posture, the way he occupied space without asking permission. I didn't say that, Nyla replied. You didn't touch it. A pause. Then, she shrugged lightly. I'm just trying to figure out why my flight suddenly feels like I've been recruited into a luxury experiment. For the first time, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Do you feel unsafe? The question should have been simple. It wasn't. Nyla studied him. No, a truth she didn't fully understand yet. He leaned back slightly. Then eat. It wasn't a suggestion. But it also wasn't a command. Somewhere between the two, Nyla found herself complying. Minutes passed. Then laughter unexpected and brief when the dessert arrived and she mispronounced its French name under her breath. She didn't notice it at first. But he did. The smallest shift in his expression. Like something in him had softened without permission. Later, turbulence rocked the plane slightly. Most passengers barely reacted. But Nyla noticed it. Not the turbulence. Him, for a fraction of a second, his hand had tightened against the armrest, not in fear. In control. As if the movement of the aircraft was something he could influence if necessary. It was gone quickly. Too quickly. But Nyla saw it. And for the first time since boarding, curiosity replaced confusion. Who exactly was sitting across from her? Because whatever this was, it wasn't random. And men like him did not do random. By the time the plane crossed into its second half of the journey, Nyla Williams could no longer pretend the situation was normal. The man across from her had not introduced himself. Not once. Yet everything about him suggested he didn't need to. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, shifting into a softer night mode. Most passengers had fallen into sleep or quiet distraction. But Nyla remained awake, her thoughts circling the same unanswered question like a thread pulled too tight. Why me? Across the aisle, he was still awake too. Not scrolling, not watching entertainment, just observing. Sometimes the flight attendants would approach him, and something subtle would change in their posture like their professionalism had been carefully sharpened in his presence. They spoke softer around him, moved faster without being asked, and always, they avoided his eyes just a fraction longer than necessary. Nyla noticed everything now. She told herself she was imagining it. Until she wasn't. A flight attendant nearly bumped into his arm while passing. She froze instantly, bowing her head slightly before apologizing in a voice so careful it didn't sound like a mistake anymore. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't see. It's fine, he said calmly. No irritation. No emotion. But the attendant looked relieved anyway, as if she had narrowly escaped something unseen. Nyla shifted in her seat. He was not loud. He was not intimidating in the way movies taught intimidation. He was quiet in a way that made people adjust their behavior without realizing they were doing it. A soft control. Not forced. Just assumed. Later, when the seatbelt sign flicked on again, turbulence rolled through the cabin more sharply this time. Nyla gripped her armrest. Across from her, he didn't move at first. Then, subtle. His gaze lifted toward the ceiling panel, tracking the movement of the aircraft with a stillness that felt too focused to be casual. A second passed. Then another. And just as the turbulence softened, his attention returned to her. You're tense, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm on a plane in turbulence, Nyla replied. That's kind of the expected response. A faint pause. Then, unexpectedly, you don't trust flying? I trust flying, she said. I don't trust situations that feel like they were arranged without my consent. That landed differently. Something unreadable moved across his expression. Not offense. Recognition, as if she had said something that fit into a private file only he could see. You were upgraded, he said simply. That doesn't explain why I feel like I've been relocated instead of upgraded. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The kind of silence that wasn't empty but full. Then he spoke again. You were meant to sit there. Nyla frowned. Excuse me? His eyes stayed steady. Seat assignments were adjusted before boarding. A chill passed through her, though the cabin remained warm. That's not how airlines work, she said. Most don't, he replied. The conversation should have ended there. But it didn't, because something about the way he said it didn't sound like speculation. It sounded like confirmation of something already completed. Nyla turned slightly in her seat, studying him more openly now. You keep talking like you're involved in things you're not explaining. I'm not required to explain everything, he said. A beat. Then, softer, and you are not required to understand everything tonight. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. It made her more alert, because people who controlled situations didn't usually reassure strangers unless they already knew the outcome. The flight attendant returned with drinks. This time, she addressed him first. Mr. Kang. Would you like anything else? Mr. Kang. The name struck Nyla's mind before she could stop it. Kang. So he had a name. But the attendant didn't wait for his response. She bowed slightly and moved away too quickly, as if even standing too long near him cost something. Nyla turned slowly back toward him. You do have a name, she said. A faint shift in his gaze. You assumed I didn't? I assumed you didn't want to share it. That is also correct. A pause. Then Nyla exhaled, leaning back. This is insane. For the first time, something like faint amusement touched his face again. Insane is subjective. No, she said. This is objectively strange. He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into the side compartment beside him and retrieved a small black folder. He placed it on the small table between them but did not open it. Nyla stared at it. What is that? His answer came after a moment. Your itinerary. She blinked. My what? You have arrangements in Doha beyond the match. That's not possible. I only booked a ticket you didn't, he interrupted gently. Silence. Not heavy this time. Sharp. Nyla's breath slowed. I didn't book my trip? You were assigned it. The words didn't make sense. Yet something in the way he said them made her question not his truth but her memory. Her fingers tightened slightly in her lap. I think you're confusing me with someone else, she said carefully. No, one word. Final, certain, and for the first time since boarding, Nyla felt a shift in the air between them. Not romantic. Not comforting. Controlled, like she had stepped unknowingly into a path already laid out, and the man across from her was not a stranger at all, but the one who had drawn the map. By the time the cabin lights dimmed fully into night mode, Nyla Williams had stopped pretending this was just a strange upgrade. Something had shifted. Not in the seat, not in the flight, but in the space between her and the man across the aisle, Kang Do-yul. He had stopped speaking after the folder incident, and yet his silence felt heavier than his words. Nyla tried to sleep. She failed. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed his sentence. You were assigned it. Assigned, not chosen. Not won. Not upgraded. Assigned. She turned slightly in her seat, stealing a glance at him. He had leaned back now, one arm resting along the edge of his seat, the other holding a glass of water he barely touched. His eyes were closed but not in sleep. It looked more like rest without surrender, as if even unconsciousness required permission. A flight attendant passed quietly, offering blankets. When she reached Nyla, she smiled softly. Would you like one, ma'am? Yes, thank you. The attendant handed it over quickly, but her gaze flickered toward Do-yul for half a second longer than necessary before she moved away. Again, that reaction. That pause. That respect that didn't feel like hospitality. Nyla pulled the blanket over herself slowly. Then, unexpectedly, his voice broke the silence. You're still awake. It wasn't a question. She looked toward him. So are you. A faint pause. I don't sleep well in transit. That sounds like a problem for someone who travels a lot. A small shift, almost imperceptible, but it felt like he acknowledged the humor in her tone. I travel, he said simply. That's not the same as living in motion, Nyla replied before she could stop herself. That made him open his eyes fully. For the first time, he looked directly at her without distraction. You speak like someone who understands exhaustion, he said. Nyla hesitated. That landed closer than she expected. I work a lot, she said. Not everyone gets luxury flights and mysterious upgrades. A brief silence. Then, unexpectedly, I didn't choose luxury, he said. Nyla frowned slightly. That sounds hard to believe. It is not meant to be believed, only understood. That answer again. Careful, controlled, closed, and yet strangely honest. The plane shifted gently with air currents, a smooth stretch of sky turbulence that barely registered. Nyla adjusted her blanket. I feel like I should be afraid of you, she said quietly. That got his attention. His gaze sharpened slightly, not aggressive, but attentive. Are you? She thought about it. About the silent airport. The upgraded seat. The names people didn't say out loud. The way flight attendants bent their posture around him without realizing. No, she admitted. Then she added, more honestly than she intended, I think I'm more confused than afraid. Something flickered in his expression at that. Not relief, not pride, something quieter. Recognition. You notice things quickly, he said. I don't think I had a choice, she replied. That earned a faint exhale from him, almost like amusement, almost like acknowledgement. That is usually how people survive around me. The words settled between them. Not threatening, not dramatic, but heavy in a way Nyla couldn't ignore. She turned slightly in her seat. What does that mean? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded paper, not the black folder this time. Something lighter. Older, he placed it on the edge of the divider between them. But didn't push it toward her yet. You said earlier, you don't trust situations arranged without consent, he said. Yes, a pause. This situation was arranged long before today. Nyla's throat tightened slightly. I don't like how you keep saying things like that without explaining. I am explaining, he said calmly. Just not in your language of expectation. That should have irritated her. Instead, it made her listen harder. Because there was something about the way he spoke, like every word had already been filtered through consequences she couldn't yet see. The flight attendants dimmed the aisle lights further. Most passengers were asleep now. The world outside the window was endless dark ocean and scattered stars. Inside the cabin, it felt like a suspended space removed from normal life. Nyla broke the silence again. Why me? The question came out quieter than she intended. Not angry, not defensive, just real. For a moment, he didn't answer. His gaze shifted slightly toward the window, as if considering something far beyond the aircraft. Then, back to her. You are not part of the system I usually deal with, he said. That's not an answer. It is the only safe one. Safe, that word changed the air. Nyla leaned forward slightly. Safe for who? His eyes held hers now, and for the first time, there was no distance in them. For you. The answer should have comforted her. It didn't. Because safety, when spoken like that, didn't feel like protection. It felt like containment. The folded paper between them suddenly felt heavier than it looked. Nyla stared at it, then at him. You keep saying things like I'm already in something, she said, but I'm not. A pause. Then, quietly, you are already inside it, he replied. And this time, there was no ambiguity left in his voice. By the time the aircraft began its descent preparations, Nyla Williams could no longer tell whether she was experiencing curiosity or quiet alarm. The man across from her, Kang Do-yul, had not moved much in the hours that had passed. Yet somehow, his stillness no longer felt like calm. It felt like awareness. The kind that extended beyond the cabin, beyond the plane, beyond anything Nyla could logically account for. And that was the first thing that began to trouble her. Because ordinary people did not occupy space like they were connected to something larger than it. They simply existed within it. Do-yul did not. It began subtly. A change in the flight crew's behavior during the descent briefing. The captain's announcement came through the speakers in a tone that was slightly more formal than usual, almost overly careful. Nyla noticed how one of the senior attendants paused briefly outside Do-yul's row before proceeding down the aisle, as if waiting for permission that was never explicitly requested. When she finally spoke to him again, offering arrival instructions, her voice carried a softness Nyla hadn't heard before. Mr. Kang, we'll be landing shortly. Ground escort will be ready upon arrival. Ground escort. The phrase lingered. Nyla turned her head slightly, pretending to adjust her seatbelt while listening more carefully than she intended. "Thank you," Do-yul replied. Nothing unusual in the words themselves. But the attendant's reaction was immediate. A small bow. A quick retreat. A speed in her movements that felt more like relief than professionalism. Nyla's eyes narrowed slightly. She had worked long enough in logistics to recognize hierarchy in behavior. People revealed authority not by what they said, but by how others responded when they said it. And the responses around Do-yul were not normal airline responses. They were conditioned. The second sign came minutes later. A man 2 rows behind him accidentally dropped his passport while reaching for luggage from the overhead compartment. As he leaned down to retrieve it, his gaze briefly met Do-yul's profile. The reaction was instant. The man froze. Not visibly panicked, but still. Like recognition had occurred where it should not have. He quickly looked away, retrieved his passport, and sat back down without another glance in Do-yul's direction. Nyla saw it clearly. She had been watching. And for the first time, she stopped pretending she wasn't. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her seatbelt as the plane began its steady descent through clouds. The air outside the window thickened with white motion, soft turbulence rolling beneath them like a slow breath. Inside, everything felt sharper, more defined, more dangerous. Do-yul had not spoken since his last statement. "You are already inside it." Nyla replayed those words again and again, turning them over like something she was trying to decode rather than accept. She shifted slightly in her seat. "You keep saying things that don't make sense," she said quietly. Do-yul didn't look at her immediately. But when he did, there was no confusion in his expression. No irritation. No hesitation. Only attention. "I have been consistent," he said. "That's not the same as clear." A pause. Then, clarity is not always safe. That again. Safe, the word he used like it had weight beyond its dictionary meaning. Nyla exhaled slowly. "You can't just say things like, 'I'm involved in something,' and then refuse to explain it." "I am not refusing," he corrected gently. "I am timing." "Timing what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat. This time, it wasn't the folded paper from earlier. It was something smaller. A slim black object, rectangular, matte, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. He placed it on the armrest between them. Nyla stared at it. "What is that?" "A signal block." The answer meant nothing to her. At least not immediately. She frowned. "A what?" Before he could respond, the cabin intercom crackled softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for landing in Doha. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." Normal, routine, comforting even. But something changed in Do-yul's posture the moment the announcement ended. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough for Nyla to feel it. A tightening in the air, like pressure shifting inside a sealed room. Her gaze flicked between him and the object on the armrest. "You travel with signal blocks?" she asked slowly. "I travel with awareness," he said. "That is not an explanation. It is the only one that matters." Nyla almost laughed, but it didn't come out. Because nothing about him felt like a man improvising answers anymore. Everything felt prepared, prearranged, pre-measured. And then she saw it. Not something he did, but something that happened because of him. A passenger in business class stood to stretch as the descent continued. As he turned slightly, his eyes landed on Do-yul. And just like before, the reaction was immediate. A pause. A recognition. Then a deliberate turn away. Too fast. Too practiced. Nyla leaned slightly forward in her seat now, her heartbeat no longer matching the calm tone of the cabin. "People know you," she said quietly. Do-yul didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He simply said, "Some people do." That answer was worse than a confession. Because it implied scale, layers, distance, and hierarchy. Nyla's thoughts began to sharpen in ways she didn't like. She replayed every moment since the airport, the upgrade, the boarding priority, the flight attendant's behavior, the way no one questioned his presence anywhere he moved. Even the airline itself, one of the largest international carriers, had not questioned him. They had obeyed him. Or something around him. Her mouth went dry slightly. "You're not just someone with influence," she said carefully. A faint pause. Then Do-yul spoke with the same calm tone he had used from the beginning. "No." That single word confirmed what she had begun to fear. Nyla turned fully toward him now. "What are you?" The cabin lights flickered slightly as the plane adjusted altitude. Outside, Doha's city lights began to appear through the thinning clouds. Golden threads stretched across the desert darkness. Inside, everything narrowed to the space between them. Do-yul finally looked at her properly. Not briefly, not observantly, but directly. And this time, there was no softness in the silence. Only truth held back by choice. "I am the reason," he said quietly. "Most systems behave before I enter them." Nyla felt something shift in her chest. Not fear yet, not fully, but recognition of scale she had not been prepared to imagine. And in that moment, she understood the real problem was not that she had been upgraded. It was that she had been moved. And people were not moved by accident. Not by someone like him. The descent into Doha should have brought relief. Instead, it brought clarity, sharp, unavoidable, and unsettling. Nyla Williams watched the city expand beneath them through the oval window, glowing arteries of gold cutting through desert darkness. Stadium lights already alive in the distance like signals of a world preparing for something larger than sport. But her attention wasn't on the skyline. It was on the man across from her. Kang Do-yul had changed. Not physically. Not in any obvious way. But something in the atmosphere around him had shifted the moment the plane entered controlled airspace. The calm stillness that once felt almost detached now carried weight like restraint that was no longer needed to pretend. The signal block still sat on the armrest between them. Untouched, unexplained, and somehow louder than anything spoken. Nyla swallowed once, then spoke carefully, as though her voice might break something fragile and irreversible. "You said systems behave before you enter them," she began. "That's not normal influence, that's control." Do-yul's gaze remained steady. "Control is a misunderstanding," he replied. Nyla exhaled sharply. "That's not an answer. It is the correct one." The plane dipped slightly, aligning for final approach. The seatbelt sign chimed again. Yet no one in the cabin reacted with the usual impatience or fatigue. Even the passengers around them seemed quieter than before, as if the air itself had instructed them to lower their presence. Nyla noticed it now, the pattern she had been circling without wanting to name it. People didn't just respect him, they adjusted for him, as if his existence required recalibration. And she had been sitting next to that recalibration for hours without understanding what she was inside. Her hands tightened together. "I heard the flight attendant call you Mr. Kang," she said slowly. "But that's not all of it, is it?" For the first time, Do-yul looked away, not in avoidance, but in calculation, like he was choosing which truth could survive being spoken at altitude. "No," he said finally. The cabin lights dimmed further as landing protocols continued. Nyla's voice dropped lower. "Then tell me what all of it is." Silence, a long one. Outside, Doha's runway lights stretched forward like a coated path. The aircraft descended through thinning cloud, the ground coming closer with every second. Inside, everything felt suspended. Then Do-yul reached for the small black object again. He turned it once between his fingers, then placed it back down. "It is not a device for communication," he said quietly. "It is a device for absence." Nyla frowned. "That makes no sense. It prevents recognition systems from fully confirming presence when I do not want confirmation." A pause. Nyla blinked slowly. Recognition systems? Do-yul's gaze lifted to her again. And this time, it was different. As in, he said, border intelligence, airline security, financial tracking, and private registry systems that all answer to overlapping networks. The words did not sound like exaggeration. They sounded like structure. Nyla felt a slow drop in her stomach, not fear yet, but the first collapse of disbelief. "You're talking about governments," she said carefully. "I am talking about infrastructure," he corrected. Then he added, almost quietly, and the people who operate inside it without ever appearing in it. The aircraft wheels extended. A mechanical shift echoed faintly through the cabin. Landing imminent. Nyla stared at him now, fully alert. "You're not just wealthy," she said. "No, you're not just powerful." Another pause. Do-Yul's eyes held hers. "I am not a public category," he said. The plane touched down. A gentle but decisive impact rolled through the cabin. Seatbelt lights remained on. Outside, ground crews moved like precise shadows across the runway. Inside, Nyla's world narrowed to one realization forming too quickly to resist. "You're not supposed to exist like this," she whispered. Do-Yul's expression didn't change, but his answer did something worse than confirm. "It is not that I am not supposed to exist," he said calmly. "It is that most people are not supposed to know when I do." The plane slowed. Taxi lights reflected off the windows like passing signals. And then, as they turned toward the terminal, Nyla saw them. Not through Do-Yul. Not through words. Through reaction. 3 black vehicles were already positioned where commercial arrivals should have been routine. Not marked. Not labeled. Waiting with unnatural precision. And standing near them airport officials, who were not behaving like airport officials. They weren't scanning passports. They were waiting. Nyla's breath caught slightly. She turned back to him slowly. Her voice, when it came, was almost unsteady. "Who are you?" This time, Do-Yul didn't hesitate. He leaned slightly forward, not threatening, not distant. Just final. "I am Gong Do-Yul," he said. A pause. Then the truth landed fully. "And I am the reason the Korean underworld does not move without permission." Silence, absolute, the kind that swallowed even the engine noise. Nyla's fingers loosened slightly in her lap as reality shifted shape around her. Korean underworld. Permission. Movement. Not rumors. Not influence. Structure. And she had spent the entire flight sitting beside the person who governed the space beneath visible power. Do-Yul watched her carefully now, not as a test, but as a moment of consequence unfolding. "You were not upgraded," he said quietly. "You were placed." The aircraft rolled toward the gate, and Nyla finally understood the shape of the truth she had been circling since the airport. She hadn't been chosen randomly. She had been moved into proximity with something dangerous without ever being told what danger meant. The aircraft had come to a complete stop, yet Nyla Williams felt as though nothing in her world had actually settled. The seatbelt sign still glowed above them, casting a faint warning light over the cabin, but the passengers were already beginning to stir, reaching for bags, adjusting coats, returning to the rhythm of ordinary arrival. Ordinary, that word now felt distant, almost fictional. Across from her, Gong Do-Yul remained seated. Still, unmoving in a way that no longer felt calm, but deliberate, like he was giving her time to decide what kind of reality she wanted to step into next. Outside the window, the black vehicles were still there, exactly where they had been before, waiting, not idling like airport transport, waiting like response units. Nyla didn't look at them for long. She couldn't afford to. Her attention kept returning to him instead. Because everything else now made sense only through him, and even that sense came with a cost she was only beginning to understand. Do-Yul finally spoke. "You are not required to exit with me." The words were simple, but they landed heavily. Nyla blinked once. "What?" His gaze remained steady. "When the doors open, you can leave in any direction you choose," he said. "No one will stop you. No one will question it." A pause. Then he added, quieter, "You will be taken to your original path." Original path. As if everything that had happened between them could be placed behind her like a temporary detour. Nyla leaned back slightly in her seat, studying him more carefully now. "And you're telling me this now because you deserve a choice that is not shaped by pressure." That word again. Pressure. But this time, it didn't feel like external systems. It felt personal, contained within the space between them. Nyla exhaled slowly, looking down at her hands for a moment before speaking. "You moved me without asking," she said. "Yes, you placed me into a situation I didn't understand. Yes, her eyes lifted sharply. And now you're offering me an exit like that makes it okay? A flicker. Not defensiveness. Not denial. Something more grounded. Accountability. I am not asking you to forgive it. Do-yul said quietly. Only to recognize that you still have agency now. Nyla let out a short, breathless laugh, more disbelief than humor. Agency, she repeated. After being flown across continents, upgraded into a first-class seat I didn't request, and told I was assigned like a file? Silence. He didn't interrupt. Didn't justify. That silence, somehow, was more honest than any explanation. The cabin around them was almost empty now. Most passengers had already begun disembarking. The distant sound of luggage wheels echoed faintly down the aisle. Still, neither of them moved. Nyla turned slightly toward the window. The black vehicles were still there. She felt it again, that invisible structure surrounding him. Not just power, but consequence. Like every space he entered reshaped itself quietly to accommodate him. And yet, he had given her a choice. A real one. That was what unsettled her most. Nyla turned back to him. Why me? She asked again. Not the confused version from before. This one was different, slower and heavier. Do-yul held her gaze. For a moment, it seemed like he might return to the earlier answers, the safe ones, the structured ones, the ones that explained nothing while protecting everything. But this time, he didn't. Instead, he said, because you looked at me like I was still human. The words didn't arrive with drama, they arrived with exhaustion, like they had been carried for a long time. Nyla's expression softened slightly before she could stop it. That's not a reason to move someone's entire life, she said quietly. I did not move your life, he replied. I moved your path close enough for collision. The phrasing should have sounded cold. It didn't. It sounded like intention without apology. Nyla stared at him for a long moment. Something inside her tightened, not fear, not attraction, but recognition of complexity she could not simplify. Then she looked past him again. Toward the door. Toward the exit that would return her to the version of her life that made sense. Job, routine, distance, safety defined by ignorance. It was all there, waiting, and yet none of it felt untouched anymore. Because she knew now. Even if she left him behind, she would not be leaving the truth behind. The plane door opened. A rush of controlled airport air entered the cabin. Passengers began to move, but Nyla remained seated. Do-yul did not look at her this time. He only said, quietly, if you stand up, you are choosing certainty. A pause. If you stay seated, you are choosing truth. Nyla closed her eyes briefly. Just once. Not to decide, but to feel the weight of both options properly. When she opened them again, she stood. Do-yul did not react immediately. Not relief. Not expectation. Only stillness. As Nyla gathered her small bag, she paused beside him for the first time at close range. I don't trust you, she said honestly. I know, he replied. A beat. Then she added, but I don't think I believe this is over at the door. Something subtle shifted in his expression then. Not victory. Not possession. Acknowledgement. Neither do I, he said. Nyla turned toward the aisle, but before she stepped away, she spoke one last time without looking back. If I find out I'm in danger because of this, her voice tightened slightly. He answered immediately. You were never outside danger. That stopped her. Just for a second. Then she continued walking. And behind her, Kang Do-yul remained seated, not following, not calling her back, not forcing the story forward, only watching her choose. Because for the first time since the airport upgrade, Nyla Williams was not being moved. She was moving herself. And in the world he came from, that kind of decision changed everything.